Morning, everybody. Oh, there it is. Oh, good to see so many of you. Happy Easter and Earth Day and Passover. It's a great alignment of many things. What a morning we've had so far. Thank you. I mean, I really value this place. I think every week it's an expression of how much creativity and uniqueness is here. And so thank you for lending your voices and your ideas and your talents and your little gifts. So, yeah, I've got a lot of ground to cover, and I'll try to blend a few of my favorite things here, which is Jung, depth psychology, symbols, Easter, Passover, nature, and subpersonalities. Why not? It's Easter Sunday. The morning we remember when the bunny rolled the stone away and the empty tomb, and inside were eggs. Um, I used to be sort of like against these images. I mean, I actually the funny thing is, the older I get, the more grateful I am, really, of the sort of fundamentalist tradition I was raised in. I actually know the stories very well. I would not have known the stories without it. But I sort of, like, in the spirit of evangelical fundamentalism, I thought if I could just get back to the real thing and clean up all of the sort of pagan influences, so to speak, then we could get to the real story. But it turns out that's kind of it's a path that's really treacherous. It's very rewarding, but you don't find, like the pot of gold at the end of the historical rainbow, and you have a cleaned up story, because that's not the way religions work. It's not the way traditions work. They change, they morph, they evolve. They're influenced by their neighbors. And after all, what is Easter? I mean, it's a combination of Passover and agrarian rituals around the harvest festival, not to mention some historical events, not to mention influenced by the Greco-Roman Empire and the narratives of, say, Persephone descending into the underworld and resurrecting in the spring and bringing new life. So these are related, and they're related for a reason, and I think a good reason. That's why I wanted to throw in a little Jung this morning. Let me get to the quote here. I love this I love this invitation here. He says, "It is only possible to live the fullest life when we are in harmony with the symbols." I know sometimes you hear symbols and that's supposed to mean, well, that's the untrue stuff. I'm saying it's more than true. It's more than historically valid. To live our life in harmony with these symbols, wisdom is a return to them. I was even thinking about the Easter egg hunt just now. I was like, because I took that as a challenge. I was like, what's the symbol? So you're telling me small children go out and hunt. They quest for things. And sometimes they find things that are empty. And every once in a while, they find things that are filled with some sort of prize, and they're meant to bring this back into the world. Oh, that works as a symbol. Go have an Easter egg hunt. And apparently children have no problem searching wherever these treasures might be. And maybe there's even something to hiding of it, now that I think about it now. So apparently the older generation is supposed to go out and hide things and hope the next generation finds them. I'm not talking about your Facebook posts. Talking about some kind of deeper wisdom. Who knows? So symbols are the things that we're invited into. And actually, every year, here we come around again. Here it comes around again. And last week, and I'm going to continue it in a way this week too, we were talking about the East facet of wholeness. And you came up with all kinds of things that were associated with the word East, like sunrise and the beginnings of things, the return of spring, and also I was making a connection with the transcendent. Like if you look at the map on the back of this, the archetype we called the innocent sage. The innocent sage, both the combination of wisdom and innocence and humor and long vision of things, big vision of things. And it's the part in us that's attracted to the transcendent, largest view possible. Helps us transcend that ordinary egosphere to some sort of larger vision in the world. That's part of what's happening every spring. Our vision was narrow during the winter, was it not? Just as the days were shorter, and something begins to turn this time of year. So here we are again, celebrating this. And some of the big symbols, as you know, thank you, Cindy, for that incredible meditation and reflection on the life of Jesus. I couldn't have said it better myself, and that was probably better than most sermons that are happening right now in West Michigan. So really beautiful, and also I think swimming in this deeper stream, what Jung would call the symbols. And what are the big ones? This life cycle, this death of things and resurrection of things, or if you want to put it in terms of more individual language, the death of who we think we are in the world, and some sort of down into the underworld, into the abyss, and some sort of return. Some sort of new vision, like the scales falling from the eyes. Some sort of death of who we think we are, and some sort of resurrection into a larger consciousness. That's the big symbol. And why do we need to celebrate that every year? Because every year we go back to sleep. Every year part of us forgets. Or if we think of, is it Rilke? I live my life in widening circles that move out across the world. Is that Rilke? Okay, I live my life in widening circles. So here we come back around again to some of these big picture kinds of things. So if that's the case, how come in a very simple way, if it's the case that some part of our psyche is patterned after this death resurrection, this sort of descent to the underworld and return, how come it's not easier? How come every year on Easter we're not experiencing enlightenment? We're actually experiencing, oh my God, I have to eat with my family, and we're going to eat ham because nothing says Judaism like ham. So here we are again. Why doesn't it happen naturally? Because on one hand, I'm saying it happens naturally. It's part of the earth cycle. Part of the pattern of the earth mirrors part of the invitation of the psyche in terms of our own development and growth. But why isn't it easier? Why does it feel like Jesus, we have to be betrayed and descend and die for us to experience it? Well, the short answer is I don't know why, but that seems to be the case. It seems to be the case that enlightenment cannot come cheaply. And one of the things I want to talk about, as we've done, because we're sort of following, I'm using Bill Plotkin's map here as a sort of larger map, and we've talked about the west facet, the north facet, and here we are in the east facet. And just like the other two, I want to do the mirror side. So last week we talked about the facet of wholeness, the innocent sage was the archetype. And today I want to just talk briefly about the subpersonality of that. Now, subpersonality is a fancy psychological term, and all it means is the personalities that seem to run our life that are just beneath the surface of our ordinary waking personality. I heard a depth psychologist say something like this week. When it comes to subpersonalities, there is an all-out war happening just beneath the surface, vying for your attention and power. And you've been hijacked by these subpersonalities. Some of them we already talked about. We've talked about the loyal soldier and the lion tamer. This week, according to the map, I want to pull out the subpersonalities that are connected with the east facet of wholeness. So if the east facet of wholeness is the innocent sage, the immature version of that is what is called here the escapist. The escapist, or the addict, or there are a few other words for it. I like Peter Pan, the Peter Pan of us, the bliss head of us, that wants to evade ordinary life, longing for a kind of transcendence, but does so in a way that hijacks who we think we are. So I want to kind of explore sort of the escapist themes, and then we'll come back around to some of the bigger stuff around transcendence. So another thing that's worth mentioning about subpersonalities is that subpersonalities attempt to keep us safe. That's their strategy. I'm going to keep you safe by helping you escape the ordinary slings and arrows of your own life or Easter dinner. All right? Here we are sitting with these insane human beings, and if I can find a way to be here but also escape, I'll remain safe. And that was a relatively good strategy when you were a kid. when the war of childhood was going on, and actually you need it. A good therapist will tell you you need these coping strategies, escapist tools, at least at the beginning, to survive the war of childhood, except now, at least to some degree, some of the wars of childhood have ended, and yet you still engage in the same strategies to try to escape the realities of your own life. I'm going to get around this by going above it, around it, beneath it, whatever it is. I was thinking first I'll pick on my siblings. A couple of years ago, we were eating Thanksgiving dinner, another lovely time of psychological health. And I remember my sister saying that they're really into football and they need the game on during dinner. Now, again, I pretend like I'm above sports, but actually I'm not. I really like watching it myself. So as soon as I heard this as a strategy, I thought, this is a great idea. We should definitely have the TV on during Thanksgiving. That way. And I remember her saying, we're just really into the Vikings this year. And as if like she was raised in Minnesota and, just loved the Vikings and so forth and so on. All of that was not true, but a convenient excuse for the escapists to get on board with and say, definitely. We can, if someone scores a touchdown, I don't have to think about the pain of my own family. Really, I'm not making this up. This is a real event and probably happened to you recently. If not, just wait till about 1 o'clock this afternoon. Then you'll be able to recognize these little escapist tendencies. Another very good escapist strategy is the early exit, or known as the Irish exit. I have a world-class escapist, by the way. I know probably the most about this subpersonality. Just where did he go? Oh, I was just talking to him 5 minutes ago, and he's left the vicinity. He's left the party. He's just gone. That's me. That's the Irish exit. Because what am I trying to escape? Really, honestly, I'm afraid of that fierce connection with another human being. Seriously, I will remain safe if I don't have to hug this person because something might be asked of me that I'm not willing to give. Do you understand what I'm talking about? So that early exit. It also takes the form of the addict. One of the things I really learned from Bill Plotkin and also some other people is a much more compassionate approach to the addict. The addict gets a really bad rap in our culture, and we have a lot of addicts. And one of the insights here is part of the longing is actually for transcendence, a deeper, bigger, more connected experience of reality is just coming in the form of something that works for a tiny moment and then doesn't work. When you drink or do drugs, you actually have an experience of transcending your egoic small self, correct? It just doesn't last. But the longing and the craving is good. Somewhere follow that thread back. The longing for the big picture, for the transcendent, for oneness, for connection is deeply human and deeply good. It's just coming out in a kind of a sideways way. By the way, brand new book out. Well, I guess it's a year and a half old now. Russell Brand's book on recovery. Read it. Actually, download it and listen to it, especially if you like swearing. It is a very excellent book. It's sort of recapping the 12-step process, saying, no, we have to look at this. And now addiction in our culture is becoming an epidemic because we all carry crack cocaine in our pockets. Meaning, if you're listening online, I'm holding up a phone, not actual crack. But it works the same way. Another good escapist strategy, I don't want to spend too much time here, is the archetype of the escapist strategy is Peter Pan. All right? The kid that didn't grow up, who has massive adventures, who blisses out, who flies around in a fairyland called Neverland. And is that appealing? Hell yes, it is. If your life sucks and your family sucks, Peter Pan all day long. Get me out of here. If I could just fly above this or around it or to some other fairy tale land, I can escape my own. It's a very good strategy for the war of childhood, except it doesn't work very good when you're an adult. All right? When someone says you need to come into work at 9, you're like, but I'm free, Just living my dream. No, you're not. You're avoiding. So that's the strategy, by evasion or avoidance, that sort of stuff. All right. Now, back to the longing, because what I'd like to say today is one facet of being a human being, and there are many facets, but one of the facets of being a human being that I think is healthy, good, and beautiful is this longing for oneness, union, connection. That somehow, to use Buddhist language, the illusion of separation, that I am just my separate self, dissolves, even for a moment. Wait, I'm not just my tiny egoic survival strategy self. Something like that dissolves, and just for a moment you have a taste of connection. Like what can happen in nature. Like when you're having a conversation with a person and you realize, wow, something is passing between us, and the illusion of separateness has dissolved for a second, and I feel deeply connected. Maybe you even feel it in a larger sense, a larger expression of that kind of transcendence, because that's what it is, transcending your egoic self, can happen with whole rooms of people. Like, wow. It can happen, a cheap version happens when you go see your favorite band. Honestly, it's a moment of transcendence. Like, oh my God, Pearl Jam, just all these people. What is that? Now, it's a relatively cheap version, I admit that, but it's still a moment where I'm not just my private self. And there's a kind of connection happening around, well, in this case, music, beauty, some kind of truth. Longing, it's tapping that longing to transcend who we think we are in the world. I live my life in widening circles that move out across the world. The opposite is the drain going smaller and smaller. I live my life going down smaller and smaller spirals, circling the drain until I'm my own private ego who doesn't think it needs anything or anyone. That's hell, you know? That's all the way down to the bottom of hell. And something about Easter is spiraling up out of that hell, widening consciousness. And in the story of Jesus, even in the midst of betrayal, I thought that was amazing, Cindy, what you said. In the midst of betrayal, denial, mockery, and the state itself coming after you to murder, Jesus says, I live my life in widening circles and I forgive the ignorance that I see here. That's his response to ignorance, forgiveness. That's incredible. That's someone who I think has tasted, I am not just my private self, but I'm connected to something bigger, to the earth and to my fellow human beings. That's the kind of thing I'm talking. I just thought of that Simon and Garfunkel song. I am a rock, I am an island. That's an escapist song. That's a subpersonality. And I think they're doing it intentionally. I mean, it's almost, there's a kind of irony in that song. You are not a rock and you are not an island. But that's what happens when the ordinary suffering of life comes upon you in whatever form. It's, if I could just be a rock and an island and no one could touch me, I'd be safe. That's the illusion of separateness, the Buddha would say. And for that to dissolve, suddenly you find yourself in a widening circle, in a widening sphere. I think that's part of, to bring it back to, actually I really liked what Crossan was saying. The question of Easter is not so much, well, here's my language, what happened, but what is happening? What is happening? Is something like the death of who I think I am in the world and the resurrection of something else happening in me? That's a worthwhile question to ponder. What is actually happening? I think that's one reason why sort of religions, why we have a liturgical year, because we have to keep coming back around questions like that. What in me is dying? What in me is being born again? Here it comes around again in the year. So I want to spend the last few minutes with Thomas Merton, because this is a very famous passage from Thomas Merton that he wrote closer to the end of his life. And Thomas Merton, if you don't know, is the Cistercian monk the dudes with the white robes, who lived in Kentucky. He was born in France, something like that. I suddenly went off into the shelves of my mind to see if that was right. But anyway, lived in Kentucky and as a Cistercian monk. And I want to go ahead and make a connection, because A lot of my favorite people are mystics and monks and things like that, but there is a kind of separation that happens with that as an impulse. Like, I'm going to separate myself out from the ordinary world so we don't have to watch the Vikings, and I'm going to go over to the special world of holiness. And it's not just in Christianity, it's in all religious traditions. So there is a pattern and there's a symbol to it, and it does matter. But listen to his words here, writing as a monk. Okay? This is what he says. In Louisville, at the corner of 4th and Walnut, in the center of the shopping district. Not the place you'd expect to find the monk, right? In the middle of the shopping district, I was suddenly overwhelmed with the realization that I loved all those people. Jung said, it's not a matter of belief or knowledge. It's not a matter of if you believe that you love all people. I think Merton is describing an experience. It dawned on me like a realization, like the scales falling from my eyes. Like I thought I knew who I was in the world, except for a moment something else broke in. He says, I was suddenly overwhelmed with the realization that I loved all those people, that they were mine and I theirs. See the connection? That we could not be alien to one another, even though we were total strangers. That's big picture transcendence. That's a taste of union. That's the illusion of separateness falling away for just a second. If you think about this, the conflict at the border right now, it's a philosophical conflict, it's an existential conflict, it's a political conflict, it's an economic conflict, it's a racial conflict, a lot of conflicts, correct? What he's talking about is the kind of spiritual conflict that's hidden behind all that stuff. Are we separate human beings? I know all of us experience an I, but is there something greater than just the I that I go around promoting or deriding, depending on your personality type? And he says, yeah, for a second, they were not alien to me, and I belong to them and they belong to me. And I'm talking about people shopping, buying crap, not doing holy things. He goes on. It was like waking from a dream of separateness. God, don't you want to wake from your own dream of separateness? The one that you've worked so hard at? And again, I'm not saying he thought this. He experienced this. It was like waking from a dream of separateness, of spurious self-isolation. Spurious. I have a hard time saying that. Say it for me. Nice job. Of separateness, of self-isolation in a special world. Self-isolation, special world, the world of renunciation and supposed holiness. Do you see how he takes a stab at the thing that he's involved in? Separation, isolation, and holiness. If I could just get away from the people on the corner of 4th and Walnut, if I could just get away from my family at dinner, do you see how they're both escapist strategies? Not totally, because this is not an either-or world. But some element of it helps feed that subpersonality, which is if I could just get away from my life, I could be holy and pure and safe. He said, no, basically, I'm interpreting, nobody told me this going into the monastery, that one day I'd have an experience on the corner of 4th and Walnut, not in my private cell. So he says, this joy to me, this was such a joy to me that I almost laughed out loud. You see how the innocent sage is right there? He has a moment, a taste of oneness and connection with other human beings in the middle of something messy, and it makes him laugh. That's the innocent sage. How hilarious that I've been so blind. That's funny. It's funny. I mean, he's saying, I spent 40 years of my life trying to get away from people, and get as private as possible and as alone as possible. And in the Cistercian monastery, you don't even talk. Wouldn't that be a miracle? What a gift. I don't even have to listen to people talk. But he gets sick and has to go to Louisville and finds himself on the street corner. And it makes him laugh out loud. How funny. So what a way to treat your own blindness. You know? Lighten up. You're blind. That's kind of funny. Especially if you go around recommending spiritual books to people. All right? Bitten by a Camel is now available on Amazon. You may. So let me finish this quote. I almost laughed out loud, he says. I have the immense joy of being human. I have the immense joy of being human. A member of a race in which God himself became incarnate. He's saying not even God could separate God's self out from humanity. That's kind of funny. All this time I've been looking for the special place where God is. And he says that's the mystery right there. As if the sorrows and stupidities of the human condition could ever overwhelm me. Now I realize what we are. And if only everyone could realize this. But it cannot be explained. There's no way of telling people that they are walking around shining like the sun. Only the illusion of separateness will do that. When that dissolves, suddenly people are shining like the sun. That's, I think, the direction that this Easter longing takes us, toward that widening sphere of who else is shining like the sun. That's that moment of transcendence breaking in. So what am I saying? I guess a question you might ask yourself is, in a very subtle way, and I know Merton is a very good writer, but if he were alive and I were to ask him, was this obvious or subtle? My guess is it would be something like subtle. It's like the realization comes upon you suddenly, or subtly. It's like right on the edge of your awareness, something like that. So a question you might ask yourself, in the subtle realm, is some old way of seeing or being in the world dying? Or did some old way of being in the world or seeing the world this winter, did it go down into the underworld? And what is just beginning to emerge, like in your peripheral vision, right on the edges? Just a little widening sphere. That's a little more of that innocent sage in you waking up. That's a little of your experience of death and resurrection. That's the tiny, subtle moments of who else is included, who else and what else is shining like the sun. So let me end again just with this line from Merton. This sense of liberation from the illusory difference was such a relief and such a joy to me that I almost laughed out loud. I have the immense joy of being human, a member of the race in which God himself became incarnate. As if the sorrows and stupidities of the human condition could overwhelm me. Now I realize what we are. And if only everyone could realize this, but it can't be explained. There's no way of telling people that they are walking around shining like the sun. Happy Easter, everybody.